Well, our public broadcaster caught being what they call a hypocrite. Our public broadcaster caught trying to cover up nonsense inside of their organization. A public broadcaster, when the shoe is on their foot, all of a sudden, just transparency doesn't exist. That is the story of today. CBC trying to gag their competitors from covering a case where one of their directors were found of misconduct back 3 years ago, and they were pleading, begging the courts, please, we need to keep the names quiet. We need to make sure no media is allowed in the courtrooms or allowed to question any of the plaintiffs or those who are defendants. We can't allow it to happen. And the judge said, nah, not in my house. And CBC will got caught real quick. That's the first story. Second story is, if you remember, today's July 2nd. Yesterday was July 1st. And we were expected to make sure all trade interprovincial barriers were going to be taken down. Mark Carney promised. And well, people are asking, what happened there? Welcome to the Elevate Podcast. I'm your host, Josh, and I'm happy to be here with you once again. If you get any value from today's show, feel free to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. Helps the show grow, helps us to continue to moving on to larger and bigger audiences so they can hear a different perspective that the mainstream media clearly is not giving. Now let's get into our first story, shall we? So this is the Superior Court document from the province of Quebec. This is the overview and what essentially is the problem. And it says, point number 2, says an independent investigation concluded that a CBC director engaged in harassment. He was suspended without pay for 1 month. The Directors Association, his union, filed a grievance. Given the nature of the case, CBC asked the arbitrator hearing the grievance to order the non-disclosure, non-publication, and non-dissemination of the names of witnesses and anything that would allow them to be identified and the holding of the investigation in camera. The arbitrator rightly refused, and Radio Canada's appeal will be dismissed, while a substantial public interest justifying an exception to the open nature of proceedings can be demonstrated in the abstract. The serious risk to a participant in a legal proceeding must be established by demonstrating the concrete effect that the disclosure of highly sensitive information would have. The arbitrator's refusal, which concluded that Radio Canada's application was based on generalities, is reasonable. And if we go all the way down to the bottom here, point number 35, dismisses the appeal filed by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation against the interlocutory decision of arbitrator Mr. André Lavoie, rendered on August 31st, 2023, in the context of grievance M224 concerning Sylvain Lapron. Obviously, anything that's happening in the workplace where there is misconduct, there is an issue, yes, people should be brought to justice on these issues. And in this case, a director was misusing his power and caused some issues inside the workplace where he was suspended for a month without pay. And it is funny because we've seen CBC, the likes of CBC, report on issues like this when it isn't concerning their company or isn't concerning their people. Oh man, they need to be fired. They need to be let go. They need to make sure they pay the price for what they've done. Believe all women is typically the narrative that comes out of the CBC on stuff like this. But when it comes to their stuff, we're going to keep all media out of the courtrooms. We want to make sure we protect everyone's identities, including our guys, Sylvain Lapron, and we want to make sure that people feel safe. However, why would you try to put a gag order on other media entities covering this case? They went and hid behind the idea that, it's just we want to make sure we protect all the witnesses. No. You want to protect your boy. You want to protect your lack of reputation. You want to protect your people. You want to protect everybody that's within your roof. And you attack everyone who's on the outside. And you were trying to prevent other media entities from covering the trial. And it is really funny because they're calling for a closed court. And this is what was really funny about it is the fact that, CBC's been a champion for open courts for well over the past 25 years. We have 2006, family lawyers call for open courts in child welfare cases. April 8th, 2016 says open courts principle is being violated in BC, says legal aid. March 30th, 2022, Quebec phantom trial violates open court principle. And it goes on and on and on of these different stories where they covered issues, whether it be them directly or indirectly covering the issues that advocating for open court proceedings. But when it came to one of their people and harassment in the workplace, They made sure to file legal paperwork to make sure that everything was gagged on the media side and no one could cover this. And rightfully so. The judge said, people actually have to be in danger. People really have to be in serious trouble for you to successfully get a court case to go dark in the eyes of the media and us cover everything. This isn't the case. It doesn't even so much as even come close to hitting the thresholds for having a case go dark. And the court document said, you're basing it in generalities. And so we're going to dismiss this appeal and we're going to move forward and people are going to know who was involved with this. Didn't look good for CBC. Didn't look good for their people. And I think this stuff is really important. I'm glad the judge upheld the decision to make sure it was stayed an open court case. Because what do we know? That CBC will crap on anyone who isn't them. And quite frankly, they've come after people like me very recently, trying to take them down, take them out. So you best know, when now a story that's going to really directly impact them, of course I'm going to cover it. Of course we're going to talk about it. Of course, we are going to make sure that people know that CBC hired someone that had harassment in the workplace and they allowed it and only suspended them 1 month without pay. We want to know what the harassment was. We want to know what happened. And we want these courts to be open. And the media has a right to cover it, to make sure CBC upholds their standards as journalists and make sure that it's a safe workplace for all who work there. And when that doesn't happen and all you do is suspend someone for 1 month, we want to know what happened to him. We want to know what happened with Sylvain Lepron. Where is he at now? Because quite frankly, if I go over to Sylvain Lepron, he is still working for Radio-Canada as we speak. So what actually happened? We want to know. Why is he still with Radio-Canada? Let's uphold the same standards you apply to others. And we want to know the answers of why he's still with you after getting harassment charges. The fact that I had to go to court and all you gave him was 1 month suspension without pay. And we will continue to cover that story and follow it and see if we can get any more details out of it because CBC needs to be held to the same account that they hold others. Now, speaking of the CBC, here's another article from the CBC about Mark Carney and Ottawa removing all federal exceptions from Canadian Free Trade Agreement. The federal government says it has removed all interprovincial trade barriers under its jurisdiction. Ottawa has eliminated the remaining federal exceptions from the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, Internal Trade Minister Chrystia Freeland said in a press release on Monday. Of the 53 exceptions removed, most of them focus on procurement, according to the press release. Today's announcement builds on the government's efforts to strengthen the Canadian economy, reads the statement. The federal government will continue to show leadership in this area and work with provinces and territories to strengthen the CFTA, advance mutual recognition, and ensure seamless labor mobility within Canada. And Damien Kirk, you probably know his name. He's the one who is giving up his seat so that Mr. Poilievre can run in his riding and get a seat within Parliament. Damien Kirk said the Prime Minister promised free trade by Canada Day. Instead, a few exemptions were removed that were in a previously negotiated agreement. The heavy lifting of many of the barriers that currently exist has not been done. Claiming or even reporting this as free trade is dishonest at best. I'm not in Parliament, so I'll call it what it is. A lie. Gotta love Damien Kirk. He is one of the most feisty MPs that I've ever had the pleasure of watching in the House of Commons. And him saying that, well, that's pretty on par for who he is and his demeanor. But he's not totally wrong here. It's one of those things where, again, we're this Liberal Party, Mark Carney, tend to operate in the obfuscation. What they do is they say, we have removed all trade barriers, which is technically true from a federal level. They've removed most of the trade barriers. However, the trade barriers that really do exist are still kind of in that provincial federal zone that's in that gray area that the federal government needs to do its work to make sure they put pressure on some of these provinces to remove these things. One of them being the supply management issue. It's a provincial issue. However, it is something that can be directly impacted by the federal level. So there's things like the dairy management situation. There's like the situations with the pipelines happening as well, where some provinces want it, some provinces don't. And this goes back to the issue of, again, interprovincial trade. There's this and some other issues between the provinces where, yes, these are technically still under provincial rule and provincial say. However, it is on the federal government to do a little bit of brokering of deals between the provinces to kind of help things move along. And they're not really going to be doing that. They're really just kind of staying out of it for the most part and just hoping things work out. And this is kind of how politics works here, where From a federal level, yes, they've taken off a lot of the issues with which they addressed with Bill C-5 to a degree. Again, we had a lot of issues. We had a lot of issues with Bill C-5, but that was one of the things in Bill C-5 where they released a lot of the red tape in between provinces. But the big name items, the ones that are actually causing a lot of the issues between the provinces, have not been touched, have not been even talked about, have not even so much as been directly addressed at this point. So what's going to happen is we're not going to see a whole lot of change between provinces. We're not going to see a whole lot of difference in terms of behavior of interprovincial trade at this point in time between provinces until the federal government really steps up the focus on trying to, at least, I'm not saying they need to have a direct impact and go in and start manually doing things on the behalf of provinces, because I significantly disagree with that. However, it is on their role. It's going to be on them to start brokering deals and help broker deals between provinces to get things done and get things moving so that we can tap into all of this. And so that's why Damien Carrick is saying here, the heavy lifting of many of the barriers that currently exist has not been done. He's not incorrect on this. They kind of went after the smaller things so they could say it's a win. They could say, well, we did it by Canada today. But the big issues that are actually causing the biggest problems have not been addressed and likely will not be addressed. So Damien Carrick saying this, he's not off base, if I'm being quite frank with you. This is politics for you, though. We always work in the obfuscation, especially Mark Carney's government is going to be doing that consistently all the time. They're going to say they did one thing. Meanwhile, they actually haven't accomplished the overall goal. But they said, oh, we did the thing. We did the thing. Look, we did the thing. And technically, they did, but they actually didn't accomplish the spirit of the goal. Yet media will run with it, hold the water for them, and say, what a great job they're doing. But anyways, enjoy your day. Hope you had a great Canada today. Have yourselves a good one. I'm out.